all my friends are simps.
The Teenage Engineering OP1 is undoubtedly one of the most enduring electronic instruments to be released in the past decade or so, and this is something that probably even those that aren't huge fans of the company or the device would have to concede. Now, I was never a huge fan of the OP1. I wasn't all that interested in it when it came out. I didn't really love the design. I didn't understand what its purpose was. However, after about 10 years or so, I decided that I needed to satiate my own curiosity, and I used some of the money that I was meant to use for going on holiday but couldn't because of the pandemic to buy an OP1 at full price. I think I paid something like £1,200 retail, which is kind of shocking to admit, and even more galling actually because Teenage Engineering lowered the price by a few £100 not long after. But I've still got mine here. You can see that despite, you know, me upgrading the knobs to some of the DJ Tech Tools knobs and also upgrading the firmware in this to a custom one, it's, you know, still with me and it's still operational and everything. And so after about 1 year of ownership, pretty much exactly 1 year of ownership actually, I thought it was time that I revisited the OP1 to share what I thought about it after those 12 months and kind of give you my take as somebody who's gone through the kind of indifferent to, you know, interested to gear acquisition syndrome type situation to honeymoon period to, you know, settled in with the device now and let you know what, you know, whether it's lived up to what I wanted it to do and whether it was different from what I expected. If you haven't seen my other video on this, I did one on the OP1 a year ago when I got it, explaining the various reasons that I thought it was still worth getting one last year, or at least the reasons why I bought one, and also talking about some of the key features and things like that. So if you haven't watched that already, it might be worth going to watch that because I'll talk about different things in this video. In this particular installment, I'm basically just going to be focusing on the things that, you know, stand out now after a year rather than as a whole, if that makes sense. So the way I'm going to structure this is by talking about some of the things that I like about the OP1, you know, after this time period, and also some of the things that haven't quite lived up to expectations or which I don't love about it in the actual practice of using and making music with the thing. And then finally, I'm going to end with a conclusion of whether or not I think it's worth buying one of these in 2022. So to come on to the things that I really like about the OP1 first, specifically things that I still really like about the OP1 at this point, which I think is important to stress. These are things that aren't, you know, just fanciful or, you know, in my head as things that I might like. They are actual features of the device that I like and use a lot. The first thing I would say is that the OP1 kind of encourages me to make music that I would never make on any other device, and that's partly because of the esoteric kind of sequencers that are available in there, and that was one of the big reasons I wanted to get it, but also because of the kind of approach to recording with the kind of digital 4-track tape emulation style thing, the way you can slow down the tape based on the tempo and or kind of contrary to the tempo, all those kinds of you know, the unique things about the OP1 in terms of how it approaches recording and all those bits and pieces mean that the music I make, often I'll listen back to tracks and think, how on earth did I get that sound? Or I can't think about how I would have constructed that or why I would have done it. It's just not something I would have done on any other kind of instrument. And I really like that because ultimately the kind of point of getting the OP1 for me was to present different ways of making music and allow me to do that. So yeah, I still really love that I can, I find a creative or a different way of expressing things creatively with the OP1 that I wouldn't with anything else. The second thing that I really like about the OP1 is that I always end up writing music really quickly on it. There is something about the self-contained nature and all the way everything kind of works together that means you can quite quickly put together songs or tracks that actually sound pretty good and stand up on their own. And so whenever I use this, I don't tend to spend huge amounts of time overly producing everything. I tend to focus very much on the melody and the construction of whatever's going on and just enjoy the process. process and very kind of rapidly will come up with something that I'm quite happy to share with people. And that isn't always necessarily the case. You know, if you're using a DAW or something like that and you're using independent synthesizers and drum machines and things, you can kind of get into the habit of over-engineering everything. And whilst that isn't something I always suffer from, really, with OP1, it is very immediate, very quick to make music, and I like that a lot. The third thing that I really like about the OP1 is that there are tons and tons of different ways that you can use it. So every so often I get bored of what I've been doing with this. I tend to fall into traps or patterns where I'm doing the same exact thing. For example, with the drum sequencer, even though I like it a lot, I often get lazy and I can't be bothered writing my own sequences, so I'll reuse the same sequences, but I'll just change the kind of drum bank that I'm using. And that's not a particularly good habit to get into. But what I've found is that because the OP1 is quite capable and you can use it in different ways, that if you kind of jolt yourself out of that kind of, you know, predictable pattern you've fallen into and force yourself to try something new, then you can kind of open doors to a whole new world. For example, recently I got bored of what I was doing, kind of fed up of just doing the same old thing on there. Everything was sounding kind of similar, and so I started using the radio recorder in there, or the radio transmitter, and you can sample directly from the radio. And particularly if you're on, you know, making music at like 1 to 4 a.m. in the morning or something like that, you can find a whole host of weird and wonderful talk shows. And I like to sample some of, you know, what people are saying, record it in. You can pitch up and down. You can use it as one shots or whatever it might be, and that added a whole new layer or a whole new way to make music that I hadn't really kind of considered or thought about doing before, at least with the OP1. And so those discoveries and those kind of, you know, continual findings of ways to make music differently are something that I really like about the OP1, and you just have to kind of push yourself to do that. Even if you don't even if you think you've run out of things to do, there's always some other thing you can do with OP1, which is quite a big plus. Now finally, related to that, I do actually really love the sounds that are in the OP1 and the kind of variety of ways you can manipulate them. Now I know that this may be a contentious point because there are lots of people who say that the OP1 synth engines are weak, or the OP1 synth engines sound thin and digital, and of course they fucking do, because it's a digital synthesizer. And I've never really understood this kind of criticism of digital synths from people who understand surely that they're digital synths. I guess they just don't grasp the concept of what digital synthesizers sound like. You know, it's a bit like trying to compare a digital camera to a film camera, but insisting you use digital. It just doesn't make sense. And I have to say that I also haven't really experienced the thinness in the way that they're talking about it. It's no thinner than any other digital synthesizer. And whilst a lot of the tracks that I've made in the OP1 have a particular sound to them, that is partly because it encourages you to write music in a particular way. And actually, when I've taken the individual tracks of the digital tape out and put them onto my DAW, you can really beef them up quite a lot. And so I don't recognise the kind of problems or criticisms about the sounds. I think they have lots of good options for shaping them in there. You can upload your own samples and all that if you're not happy with them. So that is something that I like. The range of sounds that are available in there are actually pretty good. Now moving on to the things that I like less about the OP1, or that I don't particularly love about the OP1, or which didn't quite match the expectations and dreams and aspirations and hopes I had for the OP1. The first thing is that I primarily bought this to have a portable music production workstation, in the sense that I wanted to be able to go to the park, or, you know, be on a train journey, whether that was a long train journey or a short train journey, whether I was travelling on a plane or going on tour. I wanted something that I could take with me, whip out, and actually, you know, make full musical tracks and productions on. And whilst, you know, that kind of is the case with the OP1, it is fairly portable, it's not a big device, and it is very well built. The problem is that because of the cost of this thing, you're spending, you know, about £1,200 or like near enough £1,000 on this device, and so you naturally are quite careful about what you do with it. And so you want to get a case, because it really isn't the kind of thing that you would do, you know, what you see in all the lovely promotional videos where some hippie guy is putting, you know, slinging the OP-1 in his backpack and cycling off with his dreadlocked friends to have a barbecue by the beach and all that and chucking it down in the sand. What a load of shit. If you did that with the OP-1, it would be fucked within a matter of weeks. So you have to get a case. And the problem with the cases that you get for the OP-1 is that they aren't sturdy enough to prevent kind of pressure being placed on the knobs. And so what you then have to do, or what you then do, you know, everybody seems to do it, is you get a deck saver and you put it in the top, which protects them, and that fits in the case, and that's all well and good. But then, you know, the problem is that you need the case still, because you can't leave it like this, because, you know, it gets scratched and all that crap. But then the problem with the cases is that the dye that's used in the fur lining of these cases apparently comes off, and it really does interact with the material that is on the OP-1, and it stains them. And I've seen this happen, you know, multiple times now. It happened to the case I was using, or with the case I was using. And so you then feel compelled to wrap up the OP-1 in some kind of, you know, cloth thing, so that that doesn't, you know, impact things on your £1,200 synthesizer thing. And before you know it, you've got like a kind of Russian doll scenario where you have to screw everything and, you know, unfold things, and whenever you want to use it, you have to unwrap it, you know, a whole bunch of different layers. And this means that not only does the case and everything add quite a bit of bulk, so it's not quite the same as just putting it in your backpack if you're going on a plane or something like that. It does now take up a significant amount of room, or more significant than before, but also it's not the sort of thing that you can just whip out and play or record on and then put back in your backpack, you know, as and when. You do have to kind of be considerate about it and think about it and all that stuff. So it's not quite as portable for those reasons, because you're always concerned about its, you know, safety and integrity and all that. As you should be, because you've spent a shitload of money on it. The other reason that it's not quite as portable, or practically portable, as I would have liked it to be, is that there is a limitation on the tape in here, which is 6 minutes or thereabouts, I think. And whilst there are ways you can kind of get around that limitation by kind of slowing down the tape, or, you know, doing your songs in blocks so that you don't need to actually lay out the composition, it does mean that if you wanted to take this away for a few weeks, it would be very difficult to do something like make a full album on that, because unless you've got a computer handy, you can't, you know, take off your bits and pieces and save them elsewhere. It just doesn't really work that way. So it doesn't lend itself nicely to being this sort of thing you could take away for an extended holiday and just produce lots of music on, because if you want to save everything, you kind of have to have access to another device, which kind of sucks, actually. Now, outside of that, the only kind of feature limitation of the actual device that I'm not all that happy with is that there is a distinct lack of an undo button. Now, this is a bit of a controversial one, because I know even myself, in the last video I did talking about the OP-1, I kind of intimated, or, you know, talked a bit about how the whole point of the 4-track design of the OP-1 is to make you approach making music a certain way, and to be considerate and think about what you're layering up and all that, and that is true. However, in practice, what I've found is that the lack of undo button is more of a hindrance than it is a help. It doesn't encourage you to be creative, it just kind of gets in the way and becomes a chore, because it's not as if there isn't any way to undo on the OP-1, or to kind of avoid mistakes, because what you can do is chop certain bits of the tape and put it at the start, or keep it at the end, or whatever, so if you fuck something up you can go back and move it along and all that kind of thing. And so really all it does is become an inconvenience to the music making process, and I wish they had just included an undo button, because it would make the process much more enjoyable, and I don't think it would have detracted from the kind of ideological or philosophical approach to making music that they were going for. So I'm a big proponent now of the undo button. Now, the final thing that I don't love about the OP-1, or something which, you know, has kind of become a kind of ongoing thorn in the side, is the thing, of course, that, you know, the elephant in the room, the kind of factor that comes up in every conversation about this device, and that is simply the cost of it. The sheer cost of the OP-1 means that whenever you use it, or whenever you don't use it, you're very aware of the amount of money that you've spent on the device. So if you're not using the OP-1, you feel like you should be because you've spent so much money on it and you feel this guilt. But if you are using the OP1, it means that you have an incredibly high expectation of what it can do, or the kind of music you should be producing on it, or the kind of output you should be able to get on it. And so this kind of perpetual OP1 guilt over the money begins to kind of eat away at you, and honestly it's something that I found really difficult to shake off. I have bought other expensive bits of gear in the past, things that were far more overpriced than they should have been perhaps, but for whatever reason the cost of the OP1 just seems to stick in the craw a bit more than other devices do or does, and so that detracts from the actual enjoyment of the thing. Because if you're always thinking about how much something costs, you're not actually enjoying the ownership of it. And so, yeah, the cost is a big problem. So in conclusion, when it comes to my kind of purchase and ownership of the OP1, I definitely don't regret buying it. I'm glad I have got one of these and that I have had time to make music on it, to experiment with the workflow, and I enjoy a lot of the tracks I have produced. However, I do have to say that if I could sell it now and get pretty much what I paid for it back, even 90% or 85%, then I would probably almost definitely sell it without thinking too much about it. But unfortunately, because of the nature of the device, because it's such an expensive device, if you're going to outlay that much money, even if you get a chunky discount off it, you're either going to buy it brand new to make sure you get the warranty and all that kind of thing, and you have a peace of mind about where it comes from and all that kind of thing, or you're going to want a huge kind of chunk off of the money, because even if they take like, I don't know, 600 quid off of the price that you pay for it brand new, that's still a lot of money. And so often you'll see second-hand OP1s going for, significantly less than the brand new price, even if they're only a few months old. And so the resale value is not particularly good either, which is, it makes you less likely to do an impulse buy, or I guess it should. I definitely didn't learn from that, but still. So to answer the question of the title of this video, is the OP1 still worth it in 2022? Well, I guess the answer is slightly different to what I would have said a year ago, and that is that yes, this device is really unique, it's got lots and lots of things going for it. However, I think I would take a more subjective approach rather than an objective one, in the sense that if you know what the OP1 is, if you know its limitations, if you think that this workflow appeals to you and you love the self-contained nature of it, you like the kind of sounds you've heard, you like the loopy kind of thing you can do, if you like all of the bits you've seen, and this is the device that you want, and you know you want to go for this, but you're not 100% sure in the exact implementation of certain things, but you're prepared to save up the money or whatever it might be, then yes, it is 100% worth it, because it is very capable, it is very solidly built, it is a joy to use in many ways. I just smacked the deck saver. But if you're not sure about it, if, like me, you're just curious about the device, you think it looks really interesting, you think that it might fit what you're doing, but you're unsure, and you think it's a wee bit expensive, if you have any doubts like that at all, then I wouldn't get it, because the cost is so high, and it's such a premium kind of thing to buy that I feel like you really need to be sure before you spend the money. Otherwise, you run the risk of becoming like me and perpetually having this guilt over having something which, maybe you shouldn't have bought in the first place. I don't know. So that's my conclusion. If you like the OP1, you're fairly set on it, you know that you like a lot of the features and you're aware of the limitations and you're prepared to pay the premium price, 100% it's worth it. If you're unsure about it, you think it might be a bit too expensive, you don't really know if it would work for you, but you think it's pretty cool and worth a shot, don't do it, because it probably fucking isn't. That's my take on the OP1 in 2022. I'm not selling mine because I won't get enough money back for it, so I'll continue to use it and maybe do some other videos on it and all that kind of thing. Let me know below if you're one of these people like myself who is still kind of, having these weird relationship issues with the OP1, or if you found a way, more importantly, to get over it and just enjoy it for what it is, because I still am struggling with that. Thank you for watching in the meantime. See you later. Goodbye. Auf Wiedersehen. A bientôt. Kelly etc.